The luxurious carriage flew like the wind, carrying a lady who was delighted by the grandeur of the imperial palace, which for the first time spread out before her eyes. Dazzled by its magnificence, she turned to the empress with a question about the ultimate pleasure. Honestly wondering how one could get used to such incredible beauty, she remained silent in response, her gaze wandering somewhere far away. The lady shared her future joys of life in the palace, where she could enjoy that miracle every day, and waited for Her Highness's approving opinion. The answer about ignorance came in a cold, indifferent tone. The girl noticed the shadow of sadness that had settled on the empress's face, worriedly assuming her possible guilt in her sadness. She expressed a sincere desire for understanding. The mistress, gritting her teeth, remained silent, because in front of her sat her husband's mistress. A few days ago in the imperial palace, in the luxurious chambers of Her Majesty, maids were bustling around helping their mistress get dressed. One of them, the lively Soroka with burning eyes, shared her impressions of yesterday's walk, where she met an extremely handsome gentleman. In the world of the Beastmen Empire, such encounters were not uncommon. The embarrassed magpie chirped that the leopard had almost turned her hair into feathers from excitement. The calmer white-eyed owl and the melodious nightingale stood aside and barely held back their laughter, watching the girl's confusion. After all, although they had human form, their bestial essence was felt more strongly. 5 years had passed since the ruler had settled in the empire of the Beastmen. White-Eye cautiously suggested adding some exquisite jewelry to her outfit, hinting at her first breakfast with the emperor in a long time, when Her Majesty should have shone so that his gaze would forever imprint her image. Suddenly, the nightingale's melodious voice interrupted the magpie's chatter. The girl instantly frowned and apologized to the empress. Her Highness assured her in a gentle voice that everything was fine. He said it was just a name, and there was no point in giving it too much importance, especially since something like that wouldn't happen again. A sudden scream from another maidservant bursting into the room announced the terrible news. Panting, she reported the woman who bore the emperor's name. The lady was shocked by the news. Meanwhile, in the castle, over a sumptuous breakfast, His Majesty sat unmoved. He heard rumors of Tidi's arrival in the imperial carriage, and he inquired about her whereabouts from his wife. Hearing this, the woman instantly guessed that the rival had the impudent nickname Tidi, and with bitterness she asked her husband why he hadn't talked to her sooner. The emperor, meeting her gaze with cold calm, agreed. He added that it had indeed been a long time since they had had a sincere conversation. The woman broke the silence by asking about his dream. With a smile, he replied that, according to rumors, the named feel at peace next to their destiny. The owner thought it was a fiction, but it turned out to be true. Pleasant hugs, warmth, and tenderness. The empress did not like his carefree story about another. With a barely perceptible smile, she spoke of her joy for him. She asked if he had the same mark on his body. The man denied it, not understanding her concern. Her Highness explained that as an empress, she was naturally concerned that his name might be tattooed on another woman's skin. In a calm tone, His Majesty asked if she had anything else to say. Rising from the table, he announced his departure. The empress quietly expressed her wishes for eternal peace for the empire. But the emperor, unmoved and silent, left her alone in the silence of the dining room. Covering her trembling lips with her hand to suppress her bitter sobs, the woman could not hold back her tears. A picture of their youth appeared before her inner vision. She was bathed in the silvery moonlight of a cozy forest glade. They lay side by side, he in the majestic form of a white wolf, and the young girl was enveloped by a feeling of incredible peace and comfort in his long, soft fur. Suddenly, the beastly image disappeared. A handsome young man appeared before her. He considered his appearance intimidating, but she ardently assured him otherwise. The young man said that her name, Sepia, would certainly bloom on his skin, like a seal of their shared destiny. The girl raised her eyebrows in surprise. He explained that there was an ancient custom in the world of beastmen. The names of their condemned would appear on their bodies. Sepia denied it with a light laugh, considering it all a fairy tale. But the guy insisted that with the appearance of a name, they would fall unconditionally in love with their partner. The girl noted that she was human, and his name would not appear on her skin. The young man gently hugged her, whispering that the name of his beloved would forever be in his heart. He asked Sepia not to worry, because she was his destiny. Suddenly, her memories were interrupted by a female voice, who rhetorically asked about the wonder of fate. The lady confidently assured him that the emperor would not stop talking about her, putting a hidden mockery into the words. Her Highness only cautiously confirmed her words. Titi was about to leave, feeling the pull of her own mark towards the ruler. With a smug smile, she noted that the Empress had never seen the name. The surprised woman looked at her. Then the girl, asking her opinion, showed her the name Demios, which was not on Her Majesty's body, assuring her that she had not expected it to appear there, but she thought her husband would like it. The lady couldn't wipe the smug smile off the Empress's face. Then, approaching her, she whispered in her ear, so that Her Highness would not worry. From now on, she would be the one to warm the imperial bed. Turning sharply, Titi defiantly left the room, leaving the Empress stunned by what she heard. Suddenly, a piercing scream cut through the silence. The mistress saw the emperor pick up the lady in his arms and warn her to be careful with her priceless body. In response, she smiled coquettishly and apologized to His Majesty, explaining that she had simply tripped. The man was surprised by their joint presence and the relaxed atmosphere between them. The girl assured him that they had arrived together in the Empress's carriage, and her visit was an unexpected surprise. The emperor, looking at her and gently stroking her cheek, seemed to have completely succumbed to her charms. Her Highness asked the reason for his return, assuming he had something to say. But before he could open his mouth, Titi intervened. She complained of fatigue and a desire to rest. The lord agreed, and they left together. Sepia, saddened, silently watched after them, under the silvery glow of the full moon that illuminated the imperial garden. The woman wandered sleeplessly. A recent conversation came back to life in her memory. The lady's poisonous hostility was in every word. She hadn't felt such anger in a long time, despite all the trials she had gone through to end up in the palace. The wind played with her cloak, but the mistress's thoughts were firm. She had no right to be weak. It was her duty to be strong. A sudden gust of wind tore her cloak from her shoulders, and the coolness of the night filled Her Highness. Deep in her thoughts, she did not notice how far she had come. Quiet footsteps broke Sepia's solitude, and a warm cloak was carefully placed on her shoulders. A calm and deep male voice remarked that her outfit was too light for the coolness of the night. Turning around, the Empress was surprised to see the stranger, and immediately asked about his appearance in the garden. Her Majesty was interested in who he was, a predator or a herbivore. His appearance inclined him to the former. The man explained that he had gotten lost while exploring the palace and asked to be guided. The woman, casually noting his ignorance of her title, agreed. She felt the need to thank him for his concern. Wandering through the garden alleys, they went further and further, and accidentally glancing at his hands, the Empress noticed many deep scars. A suggestion appeared in her mind. Could he be the hero who had returned after defeating the savages? And she dared to ask his name. Meeting Her Majesty's interested gaze, the man was slightly embarrassed. Realizing his excessive curiosity, she smiled awkwardly. Calling her question a bad joke, she asked if he knew the meaning of her necklace. The man confirmed the woman's marital status. He apologized for his attention and asked to be called simply Roxanne. The woman showed him the way straight to the palace gates. The man thanked the madam for her help and assured her that she would be able to return the cloak at the next meeting. The lady thanked him and turned and left. Her Highness assumed that he was probably one of the guests at the upcoming victory celebration. The man watched her impassively. In the Empress's chambers, the maid Soroka did not hide her anger, inquiring about the knight's absence because she was sincerely worried for Her Majesty. The mistress apologized, explaining that she had only taken a walk in the garden. As she folded the cloak, Magpie asked in surprise about its male origin. Suddenly, the Empress snatched it away, assuring him that it was nothing special. Turning away to hide her blush, she was about to go to sleep. Ordering the maid to go and rest, the girl, concerned about the lady's well-being due to insomnia, brought warm tea. However, the woman assured her that everything was fine, and the maid, feeling relieved, left the room. Sepia lay down in bed, but her anxiety did not leave her. The name Roxanne kept coming to mind. He was so unlike Demios. Black hair, golden eyes like a stranger. She decided that if she had the chance, she would definitely return his cloak. And finally, she fell into a deep and pleasant sleep. The next morning at breakfast, the Empress was outraged by the ruler's accusation that she had pushed Titi. The man insisted on her pretended lack of understanding. She was shocked that he was talking about the guest meeting yesterday, because it was an accident. In a stern tone, the ruler remarked that jealousy never brought good, especially in their relationship. But Sepia continued to deny her involvement. In a calm voice, His Majesty assured her, since no one was hurt, he would ignore it that time. The woman replied that it was not her fault, so there was no need for leniency. His Highness warned against exaggerating the problem. Otherwise, he would conduct an investigation. The woman did not understand on what basis and whether he had any evidence. The man was silent, and the Empress realized that he was accusing her without reason and did not want to listen. She also noticed the woman's excessive excitement, and he added that Titi had no reason to lie to him. When their eyes met, the woman asked if he really believed that the lady had no motive to slander her. The mistress stood up and stopped the argument, once again assuring him of her innocence. After saying goodbye, she wished him a delicious breakfast and left. Evening found the Empress again in the garden, alone by the lake. Suddenly, she saw the reflection of Demios in the water. Peering in, she asked about his disappearance. But the image dissipated, and in his place appeared the same man, whom she had met the previous evening. The surprise in her voice mixed with joy when he greeted her. Roxanne surprised the woman in the garden. After all, that place is closed to everyone except the imperial family. She asked how he ended up in it. The man just smiled mysteriously, calling it their little secret, and he explained that he had wandered there by chance while he was busy looking for maple leaves. He asked if she had seen those magical maples. Then Roxanne suggested that they take a walk together to admire them. Her Highness was surprised by his proposal, not understanding what he meant. In response, the young man smiled, remarking that all beauty should be shared with friends. Sepia was embarrassed. The man said that he hadn't been to that garden for a long time after the war, just like he hadn't been to the palace. And he felt lonely, so he offered her friendship. The Empress agreed, and it was a great honor for him. The woman thought that for true friendship they needed to open up. After all, she couldn't hide her true status forever, and she suggested they introduce themselves. He liked the idea. Suddenly, a female voice called out to Her Highness. Suddenly, the Emperor's mistress appeared before them. The woman was startled by Titi's appearance on her own property. She anxiously asked what she was doing in the garden, fearing that Roxanne would find out about her high status. The lady said that His Majesty had given her permission. If the girl liked the place, she was to let him know. In her opinion, the wonderful lake would be ideally suited to being cleared of reeds and planting camellias in the winter and cherries in the spring. But the mistress categorically refused, considering it unacceptable. The lady, feigning innocence, sincerely did not understand her constant refusals. A furious rage swept over the woman. First her place and now the imperial possessions. Everything became the object of that girl's encroachments. She could not understand why that impudent and arrogant person was given the mark of Demios by the goddess. Her Majesty pointed out that it was the backyard of the imperial palace, where only members of the imperial family were allowed to enter. The young lady was surprised, for she had not known that. Then it occurred to her that the gentleman also belonged to the imperial family. The man replied that he was a friend of Her Highness. Titi did not know that she had a friend, but she was curious to know what they did together. Roxanne assured him that they just wanted to take a walk. Smiling, the lady agreed that a walk was always wonderful, but she was bored and wanted to join them. The man gallantly informed her that it was impossible. After all, his friend was only the Empress. Looking at him, Sepia understood that the man was a master at refusing. Suddenly, the girl clapped her hands and exclaimed that she understood everything, and she unambiguously hinted at their relationship, and then added that the mistress also had a lover. Her Highness and her husband were amazed at such audacity. The woman did not take her stern gaze from Titi. She sighed with relief with an innocent look, hinting that Her Majesty should not be alone, and coming closer, she asked him not to worry about gossip. After all, the lady is not so stupid as to spread it. The mistress firmly stated that her friend was not a lover, but that the girl's words were an insult. Titi only apologized and asked her husband if it was all true. Sepia noticed how the lady's gaze had changed since she had shown the mark last time. That evening, behind the mask of naivety, there was hostility. To Titi's words, the man replied that who knows? After all, if she herself was a mistress, then perhaps she considered everyone to be one. His directness struck the Empress. The lady, making a guilty face, apologized again. She turned sharply and announced that she was going to leave. Looking after her, the mistress asked her husband, did he know about her connection with the Emperor? He assured her that everyone in the capital knew about it. Sepia noticed that the ruler clearly spoiled the girl. She also noted that Roxanne's open hostility towards Titi could make him a target for the ruler. With a smile, he asked if the Empress was worried about him, to which she answered in the affirmative without hesitation. Coming closer, Roxanne said that then the woman would protect him from His Majesty in the name of their friendship. Sepia met his gaze and assured him that she would do so. Then, citing the late hour, she said it was time for her to go. The man smiled and said goodbye, saying he would meet her at the festival, and left. The mistress looked after him, remembering that she had not thanked him. The Empress was walking down a wide, light-filled corridor, accompanied by the bustling magpie. Suddenly, her ears caught the conversation of two young ladies. One wondered why they had not yet returned to the capital. The other, not understanding why, was indignant at the unjust delay and ignorance of the ruler's plans. Coming closer, Her Highness inquired about the subject of their conversation. The alarmed girls informed Her Majesty. What exactly was discussed was the campaign against the savages and their detention outside the capital. The Empress was surprised. It seemed to her that they had arrived a month ago. However, the young ladies assured that the heroes were ordered to wait outside the city walls, where they had set up camp by order of the Emperor. Sepia was shocked by the order regarding the heroes who were supposed to be the center of the celebrations. One of the girls expressed her incomprehension of this attitude towards the winners. The Empress thanked him for the information, and she pondered Demios's strange order, deciding to speak to him immediately. Suddenly, the excited voice of an assistant called the Empress, Madame Remedy, whom the woman had never seen so anxious. She announced with unusual excitement that His Majesty was waiting for the lady in the reception room. The unexpected news caused the woman deep surprise. Crossing the threshold of his office, Sepia gestured for the Emperor to sit down. The man turned away and remained tensely silent. She couldn't understand the reason for the Lord's tense look, wondering if it was related to the conversation she had heard earlier. An agitated Demios approached her and told her that Titi had seen her by the lake with another man. The embarrassed Empress completely forgot about that meeting. Sepia thought that the girl certainly couldn't keep quiet, and she asked if she had cried again and complained about her behavior. The Emperor was worried about who the man was. After all, Her Highness had already invited him to the lake. Could it be that Titi had caught them on a secret date? The woman indignantly denied that the man was just a friend. The enraged ruler declared that friendship between a man and a woman was incredible. But it was obvious to the Empress, perhaps. His gaze was ardent, hot, and serious. But the woman wanted to ask him something more important. What interested the Emperor, and he was waiting for her request. She insisted on the revocation of the order to detain the detachment. But the man rudely refused her, considering it not her competence. However, the mistress wisely pointed out that the warriors were also her subjects, and despite the hostility of Duke Leofor, their exploits deserve respect for the service of the Empire. Her Majesty emphasized the just attitude of the ruler. The Emperor's anger erupted with an order to be silent. Frightened, the woman noticed the locked windows and the restless swaying of his hair. It was a clear sign of the beast's transformation. He abruptly told her she was free to do as she pleased and left the room. His Majesty's fury left Her Highness deeply perplexed. At that moment, an agitated maid entered the room. She anxiously inquired about the lady's well-being. The mistress, having gathered her thoughts, calmed her down and gave a clear order. Immediately send a messenger to the eastern gate of the capital, with orders for the detachment to enter the city and provide them with lodgings for the night. Madame Remedy accepted the order with a bow. Meanwhile, the Empress could not understand how Roxanne had gotten into the palace. After all, he was also in that detachment. The soldiers were camped near the palace. Suddenly, one of them shouted for the gates to be opened. Everyone raised their hands, expressing joy at the permission. The soldier asked the commander if the gate was really open. He confirmed that it seemed that the Lord had regained consciousness. The subordinate remarked, "What an insult to the imperial family. Even before the celebration began, they could have arrested the commander, but it didn't matter." He said that after 10 years of hell they deserved a better reception. However, they did not understand where Mr. Roxanne was. The other soldiers greeted him with a military salute. The surprised commander asked where he had been. After all, the gates had only recently opened. Roxanne calmly said that he knew, because he was nearby. The commander noticed that the Emperor did open the gates, although he had expected this only on the day of the celebration. However, the gentleman objected, explaining that it was Her Majesty's decision. The news did not come as a surprise to the man. He did not believe in the Emperor's ability to do such a thing. Roxanne reassured him, promising that the ruler would later regret his decision. The words of the gentleman surprised the commander. Commander-in-Chief Roxanne ordered to return to the capital. The men raised their hands joyfully. The lavishly decorated banquet hall was bustling with life with numerous guests. There, a solemn announcement was made about the arrival of the Emperor and Her Majesty. The audience greeted them with a burst of loud applause. They walked side by side, holding hands tightly. The Empress felt countless eyes on her. It was their first official appearance in the world, after the news of His Majesty's mistress had spread through the palace. The Emperor, holding his wife's hand tightly, carefully helped her to take her place on the throne. The gazes of all present merged into a single, curious stream. Seeking to penetrate the secrets of their ruined relationship, the ruler's mistress attracted particular attention, who, despite everything, took a place of honor, reserved exclusively for blood members of the imperial family. Sepia, despite her inner torment, made incredible efforts to maintain her dignity. Losing her composure in public was unacceptable. Her gaze swept across the hall, maintaining a mask of impassive dignity on her face. Suddenly, the hall was filled with the sounds of music, and a wave of excited whispers swept through those present, filled with surprised questions about his unexpected appearance. But for the Empress, everything turned out to be a real shock. Roxanne simply stood before her, like a vision. It was he who majestically made his way to the imperial throne, in elegant attire with numerous orders shining from his chest. She couldn't believe her eyes. Standing before her was Roxanne, who turned out to be none other than Duke Leofor himself. The man, known to the general public as Claude, stopped right in front of them and, in a gesture of deep respect, knelt down. At that moment, the mistress realized he was hiding his true origins, pretending to be a completely different person. Roxanne looked up calmly at Sepia. The Emperor greeted him with a commanding tone on his triumphant return. In response, the man loudly and clearly introduced himself as Claude Leofor and announced his victory over the savages. He continued, noting that the exploration of magical mines was ongoing, and at that time 6 deposits had been discovered in the savage lands, and the exploration of unexplored territories continued actively. Her Highness was deeply impressed. For her, finding even one mine was an extremely difficult challenge. The guests whispered enthusiastically about the Duke's impressive successes. His Majesty, with a sigh of dissatisfaction, acknowledged the work done well. He assured that the Duke's merits were worthy of the highest honors, and he asked what reward he wanted for his triumphant victory. Perhaps he wanted complete power over the lands of the barbarians. Perhaps he was attracted by the gold-rich western territories. However, the man suddenly declared that he only sought the blessing of Her Majesty. Sepia was stunned by what she heard. She wondered if he had really asked for her blessing. The Emperor noted that such a request was usually made to the High Priest. However, Roxanne objected. He claimed that the owner of the title of the Star Ishtar, the Holy Empire itself, it is she who is worthy of bestowing blessings. The priest pointed to Sepia. And no one except the Star Ishtar is capable of reviving the empire of the Beastmen, unless they bind themselves by marriage. He emphasized that she was the same star, to whom Demios himself had once proposed. And that evening Roxanne turned to her with a request for a blessing. The lady rose from her seat, her eyes flashing with agreement. She had never given a blessing before, but for the sake of the Lord, she felt she could overcome her own insecurities. Approaching him, she placed her hand on his shoulder, and full of dignity, Her Majesty solemnly proclaimed that, like the Star Ishtar, she bestowed blessings on Duke Leofor. The thought of parting words came to her mind, bringing back to life an old conversation. A lonely stranger, longing for companionship, reached out a hand of friendship. Therefore, the woman sincerely wished him to find his true place in life and to get rid of the oppressive loneliness forever. Those sincere words brought a look of surprise to the man's face. He gently took her hand, raised it to his lips, and kissed it. He also solemnly proclaimed the prosperity of the Beastman Empire. The mistress felt heat spread across her face. Solemn music filled the hall. The Master of Ceremonies announced that His Majesty the Emperor and Her Majesty would honor the ball with the first dance. Demios and his wife stepped onto the sparkling parquet floor and the dance began. The ruler stared at her, and then, with a slight irony, he whispered about his noticed presence. The woman did not immediately understand the meaning of His Majesty's words. With a venomous smile, he assured her that he was talking about the Empress's lover. The Empress flared up in indignation, categorically denying the allusions to lovers. However, Her husband had ordered her to stay as far away from Duke Leofor as possible. She could not understand the reason for his hostility. Sepia firmly declared that he had no right to interfere in her personal relationships. Feeling completely insulted, she announced her immediate departure. Suddenly, Titi appeared. Turning a pitying glance at the emperor, she anxiously inquired about his well-being, noting his unhealthy appearance. He assured her that he felt great, and extending his hand, he asked her to come with him. She complied, giving him a gentle smile, encouraging him. The empress thought. Perhaps the ruler liked the lady because she knew how to make him smile, unlike her. Meanwhile, a considerable circle of people also formed around Titi, eager to make acquaintances. She was warmly welcomed, and she reciprocated with sincere friendliness. Watching the events unfold from the sidelines, Sepia noticed how many of those present were eager to make profitable acquaintances with the girl. The lady announced that due to her own illness she was unable to host the traditional debutante ball, and she was sincerely grateful for the warm and cordial welcome. Suddenly, a man and a woman approached Titi, enthusiastically congratulating their beloved daughter. The girl happily responded to her parents' greetings. There was a whisper among those present, newcomers, provincial aristocrats, who sought to take advantage of Titi's position. Another guest confirmed the assumption, and added that she had heard rumors about their adoption of an adult girl, passing her off as their own daughter. The subject of conversation soon naturally turned to the Duke himself. One of the ladies remarked that he was even more impressive than they had imagined. Another confessed that she had previously considered His Majesty the embodiment of the masculine ideal in the empire, but now her heart was more fond of the Duke. The emperor was too perfect. His beauty, according to the lady, surpassed that of a woman. However, Duke Leofor seemed to be someone who could protect. Her Highness mentally remarked. Roxanne's obvious power was inevitably compared to the divine power of the imperial family. Suddenly, Mother Titi appeared next to the Empress. With a sly smile, she asked about a cavalier for Her Majesty, and she immediately offered her eldest son, Gallard de Louvre. The mistress, to her great regret, was well aware of the reputation of the young man from the Louvre house. He was a notorious drunken libertine, and the mere thought of him pierced her. What lady would agree to dance with such a man? Coming closer, Gallard's father firmly declared that everything was fine. Their son was the epitome of a true gentleman. He also added that in his opinion the warriors had spent too much time in the lands of the savages, and who knew what bad habits they might have picked up there. Those present were deeply shocked. After all, such bold words were spoken to the heroes of the celebration, and Sepia felt a shock run through her. Soon, shifting their attention, one of the guests cautiously remarked that there were rumors that His Majesty had opened the gates for the army in advance. Another lady expressed obvious concern. After all, the victory ceremony was to take place soon. Count Louvre, as if filled with unbridled delight, confirmed the news, and assured that everything said was absolutely true. He turned to the lady with shining eyes, praising His Majesty as the majestic and just ruler of the empire. He also noted that the name of the great man is forever immortalized in the honor of their daughter, the silver wolf and the white doe, and he called them a perfect couple. Titi stepped closer with a barely noticeable sly smile and childlike innocence on her face, which skillfully concealed her true intentions. Suddenly, she admitted that it was actually her who had helped allow the troops to enter the capital. Her words came like a bolt from the blue. One of the ladies standing nearby gasped in shock, unable to believe what she was hearing. She had no idea that the lady could be so caring. Titi, without losing a single drop of her confidence, only smiled charmingly. She remarked that those people had brought incomparable glory to the empire, and she explained that she only wanted them to be treated with due respect and dignity. That is why she dared to address this request to the emperor. Suddenly, the commander's angry voice, full of genuine indignation, rang through the hall. It turned out that the Empress herself had ordered the gates opened. He turned to Roxanne, demanding confirmation that everything was indeed so. The commander-in-chief confirmed his words with dignity. He clearly stated that all those events unfolded thanks to the exceptional mercy and unwavering determination of Her Majesty. The commander, barely restraining his surprise, added that the mistress not only let them in, but also generously provided them with a decent place to live. The Duke noted that even those who were unable to be part of that triumph were infinitely grateful to Her Majesty for her unexpected kindness and foresight. There was an enthusiastic buzz among the guests. She was enthusiastically proclaimed to be the true Ishtar. After all, with the arrival of the star to the empire of the Beastmen, peace reigned. All testified to her benevolence and wisdom, extolling her as the mother of the empire. The attention of the audience turned away from Titi, leaving her bewildered. She watched as the guests' curious and judgmental glances passed over her, and the quiet whispers merged into an incomprehensible hubbub. No one could understand why the emperor's favorite, so charming and innocent in appearance, dared to turn out to be a liar. Lost in her own thoughts, the bewildered Titi whispered in a barely audible voice that she was certain that her request to the emperor would be granted. The commander was mockingly surprised by her concern. After all, the son of the empire would hardly care about the complaints heard in the bedroom. The young ladies present, picking up on his mocking tone, began to openly mock him, while the girl only sank deeper into a whirlpool of confusion. Suddenly her father stood up for her. He angrily asked how they dared to call his daughter a concubine, emphasizing the unacceptable disrespect. The man added that he had known that those troops were imbued with a wild, barbaric spirit. Suddenly, the commanding voice of a lord was heard. He turned to Count Louvre and reprimanded him for insulting his subordinates, emphasizing that he had not yet realized what everything could turn out to be. Turning around, the man recognized Claude, and at the same moment, from an uncontrollable, paralyzing terror, long gray donkey ears suddenly appeared on his head. Those present burst into uncontrollable laughter as they watched this amazing transformation. Some exclaimed loudly about the Count's unbearable shame. Mr. Louvre bowed deeply, almost theatrically, and apologized to the embarrassed lord. Then, together with his wife, he hurriedly headed for the exit. The lady cautiously approached Roxanne and barely audibly noted that her father might have really crossed the line. She offered timidly. As a token of apology, Titi wanted to ask him to dance. The lord gave her a quick but attentive glance, and he politely replied that he wished to dedicate the first dance to their benevolent empress. The woman looked deeply impressed. While the lady felt humiliated to the core of her soul, she suppressed her bitter disappointment when Roxanne bowed before her mistress. He asked permission to ask her to dance. Sepia graciously agreed, and they plunged into a whirlpool of waltz that circled them amidst flickering lights and voices. During a light yet intimate dance, the man quietly asked if she was upset by his previous secrecy. Her Highness noted that denying it would be a blatant lie. However, she added that she had also kept her title a secret, so they were even. The lord looked at her with warmth and emphasized that his real name was Roxanne, given by his mother, and it was dearer to him than the name Claude, by which he was known. He asked to continue to be called Roxanne as they had become friends. Her Majesty, touching his hand, heartily agreed. The emperor watched their dance with undisguised displeasure. His eyes burned with uncontrollable rage. In the dark corridor, Demios coldly observed that the lord had indeed returned. The man assured him that everything had happened thanks to his majesty and his incomprehensible will. But for the ruler, those words had no meaning. He authoritatively emphasized that Roxanne could not change anything and had no right to say such things at all. Coming close, his majesty warned that the lord would lose everything. After all, the empire and its highness belonged exclusively to him. The lord, pretending to be concerned about his husband's fatigue, recommended that he rest, but he himself announced that he was leaving. Those words deeply angered Roxanne. In a separate room, Titi's guardians were having a heated argument. Her father was going wild, throwing dishes, unable to comprehend how the impudent young man publicly humiliated him in front of all the aristocrats. His wife trembled for the expensive service and reprimanded him for his careless words. The husband immediately took out his burning anger on her, accusing her of not being able to control even her own children and of her son being a drunkard. He mockingly wondered how she dared to say anything to him at all. The woman in response was indignant as to why he had spoken about Gallard, and what her fault was. Suddenly, Titi slammed her hand firmly on the table, causing the dishes to clank, and then stood up in an instant. With a radiant smile, she told them to calm down. After all, it was far from the last chance. She confidently promised to talk to the emperor and arrange everything as best as possible. The parents instantly rushed to hug their beloved daughter, their faces brightening. The man proudly assured them that she was their true, reliable daughter. Without wasting a moment, they moved on to urgent requests, begging Titi to turn to the lord for a sword for Hallard, who dreamed of becoming a knight. They also mentioned the unsuccessful search for a decent home in the capital, which they could not find, transparently hinting at possible help from His Majesty. The lady caught their attention with a quick clap of her hands. With a charming smile, she announced that the emperor would be coming, so it was time for them to go. The parents, full of clear understanding that winning his favor was above all else, immediately agreed. The man hastily bowed and assured them that they were leaving, and the mother, before they hurriedly left the room, reminded her daughter of all their requests. As soon as the door closed behind the guardians, Titty's face contorted into a wild grimace of rage. She exclaimed that they had irritated her unbearably, and she started tearing out strands of her hair. And then she started smashing dishes furiously because everything around her was driving her crazy. The lady contemptuously called them hyenas who were always demanding something. The frightened maids froze in place just watching the angry lady. The girl shouted that her relatives looked ridiculous in public. Turning sharply, she shouted to the assistants to clean up immediately. The maids hurriedly gathered up the broken dishes. Titty, silently passing by one of them, suddenly deliberately stepped on her hand. The girl winced and winced from the sharp pain, but didn't make a sound. After that, the young lady smiled faintly with relief. She resolutely ordered the maids to prepare the carriage immediately. After all, she wanted to go to Demios, away from the unbearable fools of the Louvre family. The lady slipped silently into His Majesty's dark, night-silenced bedchamber. The sovereign was lying in the room and sat up in surprise. His gaze expressed a question about what had happened. Titty, throwing off her robe as she walked, explained that she had come alone. After all, the emperor had not come. Sitting down next to him, she admired his sculpted body, which was striking in its perfection. A decision was etched in her mind. She would definitely make him hers. Throwing herself into the Lord's arms, Titty whispered passionately that she was looking forward to meeting him. He was surprised by her unusual lack of indignation, and he noticed that she always behaved humbly before him. Unlike some, words that concealed an incomprehensible bitterness. Looking at him, the lady thought to herself, was he talking about the Empress? And sometimes His Highness's thoughts were not about her. Titty's voice was filled with languid devotion. She said that the Lord was always in her heart. The lady would forever be his most loyal, obedient doe. The girl knew perfectly well that he preferred such weak women, those who were incapable of anything without the emperor's support and presence. Demios gazed admiringly at his lady, whose words so harmoniously fit into his idea of the ideal woman. Then he gently touched his name on her chest, where her heart was beating, and began to kiss the girl. She was thinking in her mind with cold determination. In order to conquer His Majesty, she would not hesitate to pretend to be weak and naive. After all, it was worth waiting just a little longer. Soon Titty would clear her way, forcing His Majesty to break with the Empress. In the darkness of the bedroom, they surrendered to the night. On the third day of the celebration, although the hall was full of noisy guests, Empress Sepia felt strangely lonely. She mentally noted that there were many state matters awaiting her, and she decided to stay only a short time, and then quietly leave. Roxanne was absent. For a moment the woman wondered if it really mattered, but then she firmly pushed the thought away. Suddenly her title was heard. An unfamiliar male loudly called out to the mistress. The young man, radiating undisguised joy at the meeting, suggested dancing. If Her Highness doesn't mind. But before she could say a word, another man ran up. Loudly, almost defiantly, declaring that it was he she would dance with. Then a third exclaimed that the dance belonged to him, as the son of a count with a higher title. The Empress was deeply surprised and frankly indignant at such unheard of and impudent behavior. Suddenly she heard whispers of rumors from the young ladies. Sepia clearly understood their meaning. Reliable gossip claimed that different men came to the Empress's chambers every night. The ladies around couldn't believe what they were hearing, whispering in surprise. But Titty stood nearby, a faint, satisfied smile frozen on her face. The day before, in her luxurious chambers, she was preparing for the evening with the help of a devoted maid. The assistant, carefully examining the lady, noticed with concern that she looked unimportant, and she asked anxiously what had happened. Titty, with an embarrassed, innocent expression on her face, leaned over and whispered in her ear, as if sharing her most intimate secrets, that Her Majesty summoned different men to her every night. The maid was stunned by what she heard, her eyes widening in shock. But the lady, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial tone, emphasized that it was a huge secret, and therefore asked not to tell anyone. Suddenly, Titty abruptly stopped the insidious whispering. She asked decisively if they had any proof of their rumors, and she ordered that it was better not to spread such gossip without any basis. After all, the Empress would be extremely unpleasant to hear it. One of the young ladies, expressing feigned regret and shame that she had not thought of it before, hastened to remark on the lady's noble kindness. The concubine boldly suggested that the truth of the rumors would benefit her highness, so that she would not feel lonely because of her. Hearing those words, Sepia was not just shocked. She was filled with deep indignation at such boundless audacity. Suddenly, a huge uproar broke out in the hall. One of the men present began to swear and roughly pushed the young Betty of the Empress who was passing by. The mistress, without hesitation, rushed to help the girl up. Her face expressed genuine concern as she asked if she was okay. The young man, whose eyes burned with undisguised arrogance, began to shout at Betty not to stand in the middle of the road like a statue blocking the way. Standing up to her full height, Sepia, with her inherent dignity, emphasized that he had allowed himself to push her lady-in-waiting. Nakaba, outraged by the woman's words, asked in surprise, "Was that girl really a lady-in-waiting to the Empress?" Then, with a hint of a challenge, he decided to introduce himself. His name was Gallard Louvre, and he was the older brother of Titi herself. The mistress's order, pronounced with dignity, was that the man should first immediately apologize to her assistant. However, the impudent man ignored Her Highness. With a wry smile, he alluded to rumors of men's nocturnal visits to Her Majesty's chambers. Moreover, he boldly emphasized that if she invited him even once, he was deeply convinced that the young man would become irreplaceable for her. Sepia, whose voice was filled with cold determination, said that she would not forget his insulting words and insolent act, and turned to leave. The boy, in a panic, tried to convince her that she shouldn't do that at all, and he stretched out his hand, trying to grab Her Majesty to stop her. Suddenly, a strong man's hand like a vice gripped him, and he screamed in sharp pain. Roxanne had been squeezing her too tightly. The Lord emphasized firmly and authoritatively that he had behaved in the most impolite manner. Then he rudely pushed him towards the exit and ordered him to leave immediately. The noise in the hall subsided, and the guests were as amazed as the Empress, who was surprised and relieved to see Roxanne. The man quickly approached her to make sure that everything was okay with Her Highness. He anxiously reported on the strange, unpleasant rumors in the city. She lowered her head as if burdened by an invisible guilt, and Sepia quietly assured him that her actions would silence the gossip. However, the Lord was clearly unsure. He explained that widespread rumors gain strength and attract bold insolence. The mistress stood speechless, not knowing how to respond. Then Roxanne, carefully but firmly embracing her slender waist, whispered a proposal, which made Sepia gasp in astonishment. He suggested she use it. She was stunned, her gaze frozen in mute question. The Lord leaned even closer, almost touching her ear with his lips, and whispered that he was truly ready to become her lover. The surprised woman did not understand. Roxanne hastened to explain that it would only appear that way to the world. He added confidently that it would not happen to him again. The Emperor was approaching them rapidly. His gaze was stern and piercing. His mere appearance and Her Highness, without any doubt, accepted the proposal. Then Lord, calling her Sepia for the first time in a long time, suggested they go for a walk. She was shocked to the core because she had heard her name so rarely. Meanwhile, seeing the two of them standing so close together, Dionysus seemed to boil with rage. His face was distorted by a grimace of madness. Outside, it was a starry evening, illuminated by a beautiful moon. Roxanne and the mistress were strolling leisurely through the garden. Sepia looked around in surprise, not understanding why he had brought her to that secluded place. The Lord, noticing her confusion, calmly reassured her that the night garden, the original place for secret rendezvous between lovers. She couldn't understand whether such behavior was really acceptable to the Empress. The man noticed the pensive look on Her Majesty's face. With a soft smile, he turned to her, asking what her thoughts were wandering about. Sepia asked directly without a shadow of hesitation. Did Roxanne have a lover? And added if true, such help would be disrespectful to the girl's feelings. But the man, noticing her concern, assured her that she really shouldn't worry. He admitted that he once had a lover, whom he still loved. However, inexorable circumstances separated them, and so many years had passed since then that it seemed too late to dare to look for her again. The surprised Empress warmly assured him that his beloved had also been waiting for him, despite everything. Sepia's simple but profound thought pierced the Lord to the very heart. Suddenly, the silence of the night garden was broken by muffled sounds. Somewhere very close in the shadows, a couple was hugging and kissing. The mistress felt a pang of embarrassment burn her cheeks, catching her unawares. Suddenly, Roxanne pressed Her Highness firmly, almost imperiously, against him. His voice, hoarse from the proximity, announced that this was the perfect place for the rumors they needed to spread. Sepia felt a hot wave of shame spread across her face. He leaned even closer, his breath tickling the woman's nose. The man assured them that they too should not lag behind that idyll, thereby strengthening their own legend. The Lord moved closer to her. Almost in a whisper, he asked Her Highness to stand there for just a moment. For Sepia, who had kept her personal distance all her life, this closeness was unusual, almost defiantly intimate. Nearby, hidden in the shadows, they were spotted by a young couple. Their faces contorted in surprise as they recognized the Empress and Duke Claude. It was at that moment that Her Highness realized with bitterness the insidiousness of the situation. Roxanne had undoubtedly arranged everything on purpose. Now that they were seen together, rumors would spread like wildfire through the palace, consuming everything in its path. Having walked a few steps away, the Lord turned to the mistress with a slight smile and asked if she was cold. Sepia assured her that she was comfortable, but he didn't let go of her waist. Deep in thought, she couldn't figure out his intentions, whether it was a game or something more. Returning to the luxurious hall, they walked together, inseparable, hand in hand. As soon as they crossed the threshold, an uncontrollable commotion surrounded them. Those present, not hiding their surprise, began to discuss their appearance with great enthusiasm. In a moment, a new truth was established. Duke Claude was the Empress's lover. All the previous vile rumors about her nocturnal adventures vanished like smoke, proving to be slander. After all, as they whispered, the Duke would not allow such a disgrace. The mistress was quite clearly aware. Roxanne had played her part masterfully, and all eyes in the hall, as if by a magnet, were drawn to them. Feeling uncomfortable from the close attention, the woman suggested the Lord retreat to a more secluded place. The man immediately suggested the balcony. On the cozy terrace they found peace, sipping exquisite wine. Sepia sincerely thanked him for his help. Concerned that Roxanne had to go through unnecessary trouble because of her, he calmly assured her that it was his choice to help. Suddenly, a sharp question flashed through Her Highness's mind. Why was he providing her with such help if it was just a simple friendly favor? She felt that the situation could turn into serious complications, and unsure, she was about to ask when she suddenly heard Tiddy's voice. She hurriedly announced that His Majesty the Emperor had arrived, and casting a meaningful glance at him, she added that the Empress was heading for the terrace. Demios scornfully said that they had made no attempt to hide their relationship. The lady did not understand the need for concealment. The Emperor, full of irritation, reproached her for lacking the pride worthy of Her Highness, and accused her of wanting Claude to receive her name. The woman tried to explain that she was only trying to dispel the vile rumors that were spreading about her. He was outraged by her cynical use of the Duke. Roxanne resolutely intervened in the conversation, assuring that he was the first to offer Her Majesty his help. His intervention, he assured, would put an end to the humiliation of the Empress. The man then advised the ruler to pay attention to another source of gossip, giving Tiddy a warning look about a possible worse rumor. She visibly flinched with alarm, and immediately suggested to His Majesty to move to another place, supposedly because of the sudden cold. The Emperor agreed, casting a final glance at Sepia. He told the woman to remember one thing: anyone who associated with the Duke would inevitably meet their doom. With these prophetic words, he left them alone. Her Highness was stunned by his ominous warning. Roxanne, bowing suddenly, quietly asked permission to go first. Looking at him, she realized with bitterness that it was because of her that he had to listen to such humiliating accusations. With a heavy heart, without protest, Her Highness nodded in agreement. Sepia felt unbearably sorry for that incident. A few days later, in the Empress's chambers, Madame was carefully combing Sepia's hair. While she was constantly thinking about the Emperor's words, not understanding their meaning, the Queen turned to Madame Remedy, who had lived at court for a long time, asking about the past. Madame confirmed her deep knowledge of court intrigues, explaining that her mother had served as a lady-in-waiting to Her Highness the Princess. So she had known all the secrets since childhood. Then Sepia noticed that the lady obviously remembered well what Duke Claude had been like in the past. Suddenly, Madame became alert, and her gaze, darkened by thought, foreshadowed something important. She solemnly announced that she had something to tell. She noted that the Duke had now returned as a hero. But once, in his distant childhood, he had been just an unhappy boy, shrouded in a cloud of gloomy rumors. The madam then asked if Her Majesty knew that the previous emperor had an older brother. the mighty Red King Laximus. Claude Leophore was his son. She added that the Red King, the rightful heir, had abdicated the throne to his younger brother Gililuder. The birth of the young duke caused the former Empress Urdiola deep anxiety, which quickly grew into undisguised fears. One fateful day, young Claude contracted a strange, inexplicable illness. That unfortunate incident instantly led to the removal of Laximus from the throne. His entire family, including the heir to the sacred beast, found themselves under relentless surveillance. Madame assured Sepia that the Red King and his wife were extremely cautious about the disease. They knew that the treacherous empress was looking for a reason to accuse them. However, to their great regret, both died from a terrible plague. Shocked by the tragic news, Her Highness anxiously asked what had happened to Roxanne. The lady allayed her concerns. Ramodi explained that fortunately the young man had returned from abroad shortly before the outbreak, and miraculously he avoided infection. However, the miraculous rescue itself turned out to be his worst test. The inhabitants of his possessions were amazed that the disease had escaped him, and they began to suspect him of something sinister, which gave rise to a deep and irresistible distrust. In addition, terrible rumors spread. It was said that he brought famine and disease with him. It was even rumored that the descendant of the sacred beast was cursed. Sepia angrily dismissed the slander as baseless. Worse still, the gossip about his chambers became the terrible truth after the maid confirmed it. The words spoken by Demios on the balcony echoed in the mind of the mistress. However, the madam was unwavering in her conviction that the duke could not do such a thing. After all, someone was deliberately slandering him. The empress, fully sharing her opinion, sincerely thanked the lady for her frank story. The woman, with a faint smile, noted that it was important for Her Highness to learn the truth, regardless of the true nature of her relationship with the duke. The embarrassed empress immediately rushed to deny it, assuring that there was nothing between her and Claude that could cause concern. The lady undoubtedly understood everything, and assured me that under any circumstances she would always stand by the mistress's side, unwaveringly. Sepia, however, was not going to back down from her insistence, until suddenly Soroka's assistant entered the room. She announced an unexpected visitor for Her Majesty. The woman froze in surprise when she heard a deep male voice, who insisted on giving him a few minutes of attention. It was none other than Roxanne herself, and his sudden appearance struck her to the core. In a room shrouded in silence, the Empress received Roxanne. Sitting face to face, Sepia reflected on the hardships of his childhood. With a slight smile touching his lips, the man noted that the woman's too close gaze could cause him to misunderstand her. Her Highness apologized sheepishly, admitting that she had not understood the subtleties of the hint. The Lord, smiling calmly, assured her that he had meant no such thing. To start the conversation, Sepia asked him about his tea preferences. He wanted to try black Bremen if they had any in stock. A moment later, a fragrant drink appeared before them. The Empress noted the unusualness of the Lord's choice, as that variety, as was known, was not to everyone's liking. Roxanne sincerely assured that this tea was his beloved's favorite. Her Highness was surprised by the incredible coincidence. Bremen was also her favorite. So without delay, she asked about the purpose of his visit that day. The man, somewhat embarrassed, voiced his request. He wanted to borrow a map of the imperial palace. Upon hearing this, the queen was astonished and immediately asked why he needed it. Roxanne solemnly announced her desire to find the inheritance left in the palace by her biological father. The woman understood instantly. If it was a biological father, it was undoubtedly the Red King Laximus, the one Madame Remedy had mentioned. She sensed that there was a good reason behind his search. Realizing the depth of his intentions, the Empress willingly agreed to borrow the map. The Lord was deeply grateful, assuring her that he would report to her every Sunday about the preservation. Sepia confidently assured her that there was no need for such concern. However, he added with a slight smile that reporting would be a great excuse for him to see her at least once a week. The mistress blushed slightly. The husband, seeing the heavy snowfall outside the window, delicately suggested that she take a short walk. They walked leisurely through the snow-covered garden. The Lord, overcome with concern, asked if the Empress felt the cold. She assured him of her complete comfort. She also added that she enjoyed the walk immensely. Looking at him, Sepia wondered if Roxanne's words meant a hidden desire to continue their meetings. She was about to ask, when suddenly he pointed with his hand, directing the mistress's gaze to the little fox cub, which immediately caught her eye. Her Highness was surprised by a fox in the palace garden. She thought it was a beast man, but adults rarely appeared in such a form. She noticed that the fox was eager for affection, so she went up and gently stroked its head. It seemed to her extremely cute. Sepia thought that someone must have raised the fox and it had gotten lost. After all, the animal got along so well with people. Roxanne, seeing this, agreed that the beast was tame, and he stretched out his hand towards it, but it immediately hissed, not letting him near. It seemed to the Lord that he did not get along well with everyone, and perhaps only the Empress was an exception for him. He assumed that the furry little one had mistaken him for a rival. After all, it was most likely a male. The Empress could barely contain her laughter when she heard about their bizarre rivalry. After all, the fox seemed so touchingly cute to her. The pretendedly saddened Lord remarked that Her Highness's heart was inclined towards the fox cub more than towards him. She playfully assured him that he shouldn't say such things, but still continued to pet the little animal. However, as soon as the man tried to approach, the fox suddenly howled loudly, as if in protest, and immediately ran away. As he shook hands with Sepia, he triumphantly declared that he had not intended to do so. However, his rival had decided to step out of the way. The mistress, rising with his help, noticed a playful glint in his eyes. Then Roxanne looked at her thoughtfully, and I asked if Her Majesty knew that feelings of jealousy could arise even between two people, and even more so between friends. With a smile touching her lips, the mistress noted that the man seemed to be jealous of the fox cub. He confirmed without hesitation that he was not just a little jealous, and he added very strongly that he wished her to prefer him above all else. Those words caused a bright blush to flood the Empress's face. The Lord, holding Her Majesty's hand tightly, stood motionless beside her, and they both froze in the middle of the silent, snow-covered garden. Meanwhile, at the Crudio mansion, Atensil was stunned by his own transformation. He boasted to his elder with excessive joy that he was human. His brother, General Jesper Crudio of the Imperial Army, angrily assured him that he had seen everything, but insisted on immediate clothing. The man understood the young man's boundless joy. However, several hours had passed since his transformation, and he still could not calm down. The guy was indignant not just at his own happiness, but because others had the gift of reincarnation from birth, while he was destined to wait for 20 years. He remained that damned fox all his life, and complained in despair that his brother was unable to even slightly comprehend the depth of his suffering. Jesper, softening his tone with an apology, still ventured to ask again. Was his brother going to bring up the subject of the Empress again? Atensil passionately asserted that it was her touch that had helped him transform. However, his older brother categorically rejected these claims as complete nonsense. The young man explained with enthusiasm that this was exactly what had happened. He had tried all the known medicines, holy water, and ancient beliefs, but nothing had worked. But as soon as Her Majesty touched him, a miracle happened. The exhausted man had difficulty believing in the unwavering sincerity of his brother's convictions. Atensil, not understanding his skepticism, fervently assured him that there was no reason for doubt. After all, the ruler, the star, was Ishtar. The boy was healed by her touch, which was what his fate had brought him. The young man smugly admired his own beauty, calling himself handsome. He involuntarily imagined that he might even interest Her Majesty. The elder brother barely contained his irritation, and he advised him not to make fun of her. After all, the woman had an emperor and a duke, and therefore he could not possibly be of any interest to her. However, Atensil did not heed his brother's words, and he pictured in his imagination how the name of the Empress would shine on him. He recalled the rumors that even the ruler's concubine had received a title because of her name, and he exclaimed that true fate had befallen him. Jesper kept repeating that the Empress was only mortal and no name would appear on her. However, the young man assured him that no one could know for sure. After all, Her Majesty the Star Ishtar was born by fate from a beastman. However, as soon as he smelled that familiar scent, everything instantly fell into place, and the young man felt that he was ready to fight for her with that male. However, his older brother remained completely confused. The boy turned to him with one request. When he went to the palace, he should take him with him. He wanted to show the Empress his human form. One day, Sepia and the Lord engaged in a silent battle behind the chessboard. She held her breath as she watched the Lord's tense brow. He was considering his next move. A faint smile played on her lips. A moment later, the mistress announced her decisive move. Victory was on her side. With a sigh, Roxanne admitted another defeat. But there was a playful note in his voice as he asked for a handicap in the next game. The request for preference surprised the Empress. After all, the Lord found countless occasions for meetings, invariably mentioning the lost map. She wondered how many more times he would use that maneuver. The woman cautiously asked if he would return to the family estate after receiving his inheritance. Roxanne replied that it was most likely so. The lady wondered about the fate of the inhabitants of Leofor, who had unjustly accused him of spreading the disease. Will he be able to return home and find peace? Sepia cautiously noted that she had heard about the tragedy in Leofor, suggesting that he might have been the victim of a conspiracy. Her words deeply affected the man. He was about to respond when suddenly the silence of the room was broken by a persistent knock on the door. Madame Remedy entered the room, announcing to Her Majesty the Emperor's arrival. The woman was surprised by this surprise. She asked him to tell her to wait a bit. However, before Madame could return, Demios was already standing behind her. He coldly remarked that such a mature woman as Remody could not have simply shown such a picture. The Lord was clearly not in the best of humor. After all, their words came back to his memory, that everything had been done to cover up one rumor with another. Although it seemed to him that everything was completely different, Sepia calmly explained that they were just playing chess. He sarcastically asked if playing was the only thing they had planned. The Empress flatly objected and asked about his visit. He feigned indifference and replied that he did not consider it necessary to have an occasion to meet his wife. Turning to Roxanne, Her Highness apologized and asked him to leave her chambers. Bowing, the Lord left the room without any resistance. In passing, the man met the Emperor's gaze. He gave him a quick but piercing look. Following him, the mistress emphasized the upcoming meeting with the Lord. She explained to Demios that their conversation with Roxanne had been planned. The woman understood that his visits would not stop, but she assured him that she had good reasons for it. Her explanations seemed unconvincing to His Majesty. Irritated, Sepia pointed out that even her frequent meetings with the Duke took less time than his dates with his mistress, and she asked if the Lord was going to go to Titi after their conversation. In response, he only remained silent, looking at her with a stern look. Sepia continued to investigate the reason for his attitude towards her. With bitterness, she rhetorically asked if the relationship had become formal, especially after he got a mistress, and then he suddenly appears and acts like a man. Demios ignored her words, but he asked why the Duke. The woman didn't understand why it was so important to him, and he hated the Duke, believing that the reason was his past. The ruler realized that Her Highness obviously knew everything, but despite that, she kept him close. However, the woman firmly stated that she didn't believe the baseless accusations, and asked if His Majesty really believed that lie. Raising his voice, the man assured her that he was motivated only by concern for her. She emphasized that even the affair with the Duke had no relevance to his past. Sepia asked worriedly, shouldn't she just fulfill her duties as Empress just as he did his? His Majesty laughed bitterly, assuming that she could well have made the Duke her lover. Then he roughly grabbed her face with a large hand, and his eyes flashed bright red with anger. The Emperor emphasized the absence of true marital ties between them, reproaching the Empress for frequently forgetting his status as a husband. Sepia trembled, speechless. She felt a paralyzing fear. He insisted on an answer, resenting her silence, and he confidently declared the excessive gentleness of her character. After that, he threw her onto the sofa. The woman screamed in a faint voice, looking at him in horror. Sepia did not understand his desires. As he approached, the Emperor again emphasized the difference between a mistress and the Empress, his wife. Calming down, the man reached out his hand. He gently stroked her cheek, waiting for confirmation that she understood him. But Sepia did not back down, declaring that since the appearance of his mistress, any relationship between them had ceased. His Majesty was amused by her boldness, and he ordered her to continue speaking as she saw fit, reminding her that it was she who had first rejected him, remembering their wedding night, when the man gently touched her face, calling her name. Slowly removing the cape, he watched as the girl became embarrassed. Fear darkened Sepia's eyes, and she barely audibly apologized. Explaining her unpreparedness, the man stepped back, showing understanding and not insisting. The woman was surprised when Demios spoke of their wedding night 5 years ago. He could not understand the reason for her confused look, asking why she seemed so embarrassed. After all, he didn't think the Empress had forgotten about that special day. Her Highness looked down, lost in memories of that evening. She felt again her inability to accept his closeness, that instinctive refusal, the nature of which remained an unsolved mystery to her. The woman sat and remained silent. The man insisted that the birth of an heir to the throne was the empress's duty, which she constantly mentioned. The confused mistress could not find a response. He took her by the shoulders, reminding her of the 5 years that had passed since her refusal. Confused, Sepia said that if he needed intimacy, he could turn to Tidai. Those words made him furious and he screamed, accusing her of treating him like an animal. With irony in his voice, Demios asked if the Duke knew that the Empress remained a virgin. He bent down and rested his knee on the sofa at her feet, causing the woman to shudder with fear. In a stern tone, the Lord ordered her to remember that he was her only husband. The Empress trembled, pushing his shoulders with her hands, trying in vain to push him away. Touching Sepia's face again gently, the man ran his hand down her neck. She begged him to stop, but the Emperor's gaze remained cruel and commanding. He spoke boldly, that there was nothing wrong with a man wanting to completely possess his wife, leaning almost close to her face, and adding to that he wondered if a woman's choice wasn't always her husband's. Sepia closed her eyes, mentally repeating her inability. Her Highness was seized with terror and her whole body trembled. He watched her with a faint smile, noticing her fright. Demios, without letting go of the woman, gave her advice. It would be good to weigh her imperial duties. Then he got up and left the room. Roxanne was waiting for him in the corridor. The Lord had not anticipated that meeting, and before he could recover, he felt a sharp blow to the face from the Lord. The enraged Emperor burst into a scream, calling him a fool, and asked Roxanne about the audacity to raise a hand against His Majesty. He emphasized that the man was destined to die far from his homeland. The Emperor demanded an explanation for his return. Roxanne calmly reminded him of his warning and his promise. Demios, gaining insolence, declared that the Lord would never become one, and the Empress will never remember him. His Majesty threw those words right in her face with a contemptuous smile. The next day, Sepia was strolling leisurely through her estate, accompanied by her maid of honor, Magpie. The girl noticed that the end of winter was approaching. She also noticed her mistress's worried look. The girl suggested that the reason for this was His Majesty's departure to the winter residence. The Magpie added that she also did not like the Emperor's behavior. The Queen asked her not to worry, assuring her that it was not important. Her thoughts were occupied by her husband's words about her evasion of imperial duty and her destiny to give birth to an heir. She couldn't imagine how much longer she could refuse him. Suddenly the maid of honor exclaimed, noticing the figures approaching them. From a distance she recognized General Jesper, and next to him she saw an unfamiliar young man. The commander and the young man greeted Her Majesty. The Empress remarked that she had not seen the general for a long time, and asked who his companion was. The boy introduced himself as Ettenzel, the second son of the Crudio family, and coming closer he expressed his great desire to meet her. A confused Sepia greeted him, thinking it was their first time meeting. Jesper explained that his brother wanted to see the palace, that he had decided to keep him company. Besides, the general wanted to apologize for the incident at the celebration. Sepia remembered the incident with the son of the Louvre family. There was also talk of his release on a large bail. Her Highness wondered who had paid the expenses, Titi or His Majesty. The Empress assured him that everything was fine, since it was not his fault. However, Jesper felt responsible for the safety of the event. He considered it necessary to apologize to the Empress and her maid of honor. Magpie blushed, but to the Empress's noticeable smile, she assured him that everything was fine. Her Highness asked the young man the purpose of his visit to the palace. He told her that he was looking for his fox, which had been seen in the imperial garden. Sepia remembered the red fox cub she had seen, and was surprised to learn that it belonged to Ettenzel. She noted that the beast had not been seen recently, and the woman began to worry. The boy suggested that Her Majesty search for the animal together. The mistress was confused, but in the end she agreed. During the walk, Ettenzel asked if the Empress had been looking after his fox the whole time. She corrected him that she had only seen the animal a few times, and she asked about the circumstances of the fox cub's disappearance. The young man quickly made up a story about the fox's sudden disappearance, about their futile search throughout the estate, and the assumption that he could have hidden in his brother's carriage, who was on his way to work. Sepia was surprised to note that this was the very spot where they had first encountered the fox. The boy agreed, calling it a perfect hideout. And looking at her, he added about his fox's special love for beautiful blue-eyed ladies. The woman did not understand his hint. Etensel, laughing, suggested that they continue their search. Soon they approached the bridge over the garden river, and the young man noticed the slippery road. So he extended his hand to the mistress. Sepia was confused, feeling disgusted by any male touch. Although her reaction had not been so strong before, she couldn't understand why Roxanne's touch hadn't caused such a rejection. The young man insisted, and the Empress reluctantly offered him her hand. The young man was surprised by the coldness of her palm, expressing concern about her condition. But Sepia assured her that everything was fine, and suggested they continue on their way. She thought that perhaps it was the unfamiliar touch that was making her tense. The road on the bridge was slippery and it was difficult to hold on to one. Caution could have helped her cross, but as soon as she took a step, she felt herself losing her balance and falling. Eatansel only watched helplessly as she fell. Suddenly a man appeared behind her. The Empress did not immediately understand who had saved her. The Lord remarked about being careful on the ice. She looked at him with surprised big blue eyes. A memory from her childhood flashed through her mind, when she and young Demios were walking through a snowy forest and almost stepped on ice, and he stopped her, warning her about the slippery surface. Looking at her savior, she first thought of the Emperor, but then she realized that before her was Roxanne. The husband expressed concern about her condition, to which the Empress assured him that she felt fine, although she was very surprised. She thought the advice to be careful on snowy roads was common knowledge. Trying to stay calm, the Lord was surprised to see the son of House Crudio in the palace. The disgruntled young man explained that they were only looking for his fox. Roxanne insisted on searching on her own, considering the slippery surface that could be dangerous for Her Majesty. In response, Eatansel asked about the purpose of the Lord's visit to the palace, thereby causing him to laugh lightly. Approaching Sepia, he assured her that no special reason was needed for their meeting, adding that the young man was still too young to understand that. The boy became angry. Approaching the man, he insisted that he not be considered a child. The Empress turned to Eatansel. She announced the end of the search for the fox due to her scheduled meeting with the Duke. The young man bowed, expressed his understanding, and said goodbye and left. When they were left alone, the mistress asked Roxanne how he had learned of her presence in that remote corner of the garden. He explained that one of her ladies-in-waiting had informed him of this. Although he regretted interrupting her conversation with the general, the Empress thought that Betty had lost her mind because of him. The Lord, just in case, warned the woman against being too trusting of inexperienced men, hinting that innocent appearances could be deceiving. The lady did not understand his hint. He explained that in his opinion the young man wanted her friendship. Sepia smiled faintly, not sharing his thoughts. Meeting the woman's gaze, the Lord assured her that he had sought to be her only friend. Her Highness felt the need to express her doubts earlier, as some of the man's words might have been taken incorrectly. However, Roxanne assured her of his sincerity. Then Sepia remembered his lover, and asked if he had found the girl, immediately realizing his haste. Bowing his head, he announced that he had found her, but she was married. The Empress felt that she had touched on a sensitive subject, and embarrassed, did not know how to respond. Sighing, the Lord assured her that it was his fault, not hers. He added with elation that it would be necessary to check whether her husband was worthy of being her companion. Sepia was surprised by his words, but he assured her that it didn't matter because they were almost there. It was already getting dark, and he promised to show the map next time. On the threshold, the man advised her to return before dark, and kissing Her Highness's hand, he wished her good night. The woman replied in the same way. The king's bedroom was filled with intimacy. He was tenderly embracing his concubine, who was thanking him for the luxurious setting. He noticed her excessive gratitude, to which Titi replied that she appreciated his presence and the honor of bearing his name. The Emperor tenderly bared her shoulder and kissed the tattooed name. The girl reflected on the obvious gulf between the ruler and the Empress. After all, it was she, not his legal wife, who shared that evening with him. In his arms, the lady looked at the snowfall and remembered her poor past in the slums, where the snowy streets were dirty and the voices of the poor were full of complaints. Then she heard about the new Empress, who opened a shelter for the poor, distributing bread and water, bringing them joy. These memories contrasted with her current situation, and Titi accused Her Majesty of hypocrisy, rejecting thoughts of poverty and seeking to seize everything that belonged to the Empress. Hugging Demios tightly, she whispered about her boundless happiness and gratitude. He assured her that the lady had made his life beautiful and special. Titi looked at him with innocent eyes, asking him not to let his hatred of the Empress cloud their relationship, fearing unforeseen consequences. The Lord noticed the girl's anxiety about Sepia. Looking down, she quietly said that the Lord hated her, but the husband objected, believing that she did not hate the concubine but was simply incapable of loving anyone. After a silent pause, Titi announced the upcoming purification ritual and asked if she could go with him. The emperor was surprised by her desire, explaining that the sacred ceremony was only for the descendants of the sacred beasts, and only the emperor and empress participated in it. He also emphasized that only with divine permission could one enter the underground temple. The girl apologized sadly, explaining her jealousy. With a heavy sigh, she spoke of her desire to possess him alone. His Highness abruptly placed her on the bed, towering over her, assuring her that she had always given him pleasure. The man heard in response that he was the lady's happiness. In their embrace, they indulged in nightly passion. The next morning, Titi was finishing her toilet, admiring her reflection in the mirror when her maids unexpectedly announced a visitor. Approaching the door, she asked with displeasure about the unexpected guests. However, when she looked up, she was amazed. Before her stood a man in a black cloak, his face hidden in the shadow of his hood. Taking it off, the stranger asked if the name was still there. The very day arrived. The first ray of the new year touched the frozen earth, carrying the burden of an ancient ritual of purification. The Empress, wrapped in robes that seemed woven from moonlight, walked through the stony corridors of the palace. Her gait was slow, almost weightless. Demios's words still lingered in her mind, like needles of ice reminding her of her imperial duty. After that conversation, Sepia skillfully managed to avoid meeting the ruler. But that day, escape was impossible. Like two chirping birds, Magpie and his assistant circled side by side. Their voices enthusiastically sang the unearthly beauty of Her Majesty. They prophesied imminent good fortune, wealth, and the flourishing of the empire. The girl's words were warm. Sepia smiled, thanking them for their kindness. The ruler stood by the heavy doors leading to the underground sanctuary. His ritual attire, light and strict, only emphasized his commanding figure, but His Majesty's gaze was cold as a winter wind, and there was not a single shadow of yesterday's tenderness in it. He silently extended his hand. The gesture was not a request but an order. Sepia, sighing silently, slowly extended her hand. Their hands joined, and in the light of a flickering lantern they moved into the depths of darkness, where the fate of the empire for a whole year would be decided. The emperor and empress immersed themselves in the waters of the sacred lake. Then they spent the night in the temple, purifying themselves from defilement. Entering the water, the woman felt cold. After all, the water that penetrated the grotto was mixed with seawater. She pondered the vastness of the unknown sea. Demios, without taking his eyes off her, asked her what she thought, to which she replied that she was simply imagining the real sea. He was shocked to learn that she was not familiar with him. Sepia remembered a childhood promise to show her the coast, which her husband did not remember. Turning away, His Highness remarked that, provided she fulfilled her imperial duties, he could arrange for her to take several trips to the sea. The woman understood the hidden meaning of his words about duties. However, the internal struggle did not allow her to easily accept the proposed agreement. Suddenly, Demios screamed and grabbed his head, apparently in great pain. Then, unexpectedly, he completely submerged himself in the water. Frightened, she screamed, calling out his title, and rushed towards him. When she reached the shore, Sepia felt the heat radiating from the man's body. The sovereign came to his senses, and Her Highness tried to attract his attention. She was about to call the servants and asked him to wait. But as soon as she started to move, the emperor grabbed her hand, preventing her from leaving. He put his arms around her waist, hugged her tightly, and begged her to stay. Sepia tried to reassure him that it was dangerous to remain in this state, but he insisted that he was her husband. The bright red glint in his eyes held the mistress in icy terror. He waited for the woman to speak, but anxiety blocked her voice, causing a wave of irritation in him that quickly turned to anger. Suddenly he lunged at her, and Sepia found herself on the cold stone floor. A cry of terror escaped Her Highness's lips, begging the emperor to stop. In one terrifying moment, his hands were around her neck, cutting off her air. Demios's face twisted with rage. He held her neck tightly and insisted that she belonged to him. She whispered his name desperately, but he did not hear. Her Highness was seized by a primal horror at the bestial gleam in her husband's eyes. And again the imperious assertion of her belonging to him was heard. Only when the air in the woman's lungs was almost gone did the lord's grip loosen. He fainted again. Taking a convulsive breath, Sepia realized with horror how close death had been, and how he could have done this. In the morning, she helped him up, feeling how heavily he leaned on her. When asked how he was feeling, he assured her that he was able to walk, but there was a void in his eyes. The Emperor had absolutely no memory of the terrible events of the previous evening. As soon as they crossed the threshold of the sanctuary, Titi met them. Her face distorted with anxiety as she saw the haggard appearance of the ruler. His pallor could not go unnoticed, and running up, she touched his forehead, feeling the heat. The Empress reported his brief loss of consciousness in the temple. She hurriedly asked her assistant to immediately find the court physician. Suddenly, Demios's call rang through the air and he reached out his hand to her. The gesture sent a wave of terror through Sepia, and she instinctively touched her neck, where faint bruises reminded her of the recent danger. She unconsciously stepped back. His gaze was full of guilt. But suddenly, Titi's boisterous laughter cut through the tense silence. The Emperor succumbed to the cheerful mood, embracing her around the waist and imperiously declaring her his. Leaning her head against his shoulder, the lady confirmed his words, assuring him that from now on she would take care of him. At that moment, from under his furrowed brows, the ruler cast a fleeting glance at the Empress, in which Sepia read a silent accusation. She saw his true nature, the monster hiding under the mask of power. Turning away, Her Majesty stood silently, stunned. His Majesty's angry gaze, like a bolt of lightning, pierced her silence. Then he addressed his subjects. His words sounded like a gloomy prophecy that the new year would bring only misfortune. Those words struck the queen to her very heart. Deep shock was reflected in her eyes. After all, the fate of the empire for an entire year depended on the outcome of the purification ritual, which could unfold according to one of 5 scenarios. The greatest good luck was the glow of a special light in the temple, heralding great well-being and prosperity. Ordinary luck also promised prosperity. A neutral result indicated stability and peace in the empire. Misfortune warned of possible disasters that could strike the entire state. And the greatest misfortune foreshadowed wars, catastrophes, and crises on a national scale. The subjects froze and were speechless at the news they heard. Then their surprise and alarm merged into a low whisper. Since Sepia had ascended the throne, luck had always been their constant companion. What could have changed this time remained incomprehensible. The shocked concubine did not take her eyes off the Emperor. She asked if they should hurry to the temple because its appearance was alarming. He nodded in agreement, and they disappeared behind the heavy door. Her Highness silently followed them with her gaze, her thoughts filled with heavy forebodings. The lord in his office was absorbed in state affairs and the advice of his subordinates. He carefully studied the map of the imperial palace. The commander expressed his opinion about the futility of searching for the relics of the late king, comparing everything to looking for a needle in a haystack. Roxanne was aware of the complexity of the task, but insisted on continuing the search. Her subordinates accepted the order. The tired man thought about the endless search. However, he felt a duty to find his father's relics, for which he had returned to the capital. He remembered his childhood, his father on his deathbed, and his quiet but powerful story about the Black Curse. That one day he would ascend the divine beast with crimson eyes and destroy the empire. Those words deeply affected the boy. The father insisted on the need to find the eyes of the wolf and his companion, hidden in the capital, which were to become their protection. Little Roxanne listened intently to every word he said. He thought that the crimson eyes probably belonged to the current Emperor Demios. The lord inquired for news from the Empress's palace, but there was none. He sadly noted that it had been 2 weeks since the ritual since he had seen her. The subordinate tried to calm him down, suggesting that after the announcement of the disaster, the ruler was probably preoccupied with state affairs. But deep down, Roxanne knew the real reason for his longing. He simply longed to see her face again. Sepia worked tirelessly. In times of trouble, the state treasury needed significant funds. After all, the lowest strata of society suffered the most. She continued to carefully review the documents. At least that wasn't the biggest disaster. It was just that all the new projects had to be cancelled. Leaning back in her chair, she remembered again the terrible image of her master, who was strangling her. The words about belonging to him. She even physically felt the pressure on her neck. This frightened the woman, and she tried to drive away those thoughts. Suddenly, the assistant announced the arrival of His Majesty's servant and asked permission to let him in. Surprised by the unexpected visit at such an hour, The Empress allowed him to come in. The young man, entering the office, bowed and apologized for the late visit. Concerned, Sepia asked what had happened. The boy placed 2 envelopes on the table and announced the ruler's decrees prohibiting the creation of a charity department. Her Majesty was shocked and could not understand what it all meant. So she immediately decided to visit him. She was waiting for him in the living room. Entering the room, the man was surprised by the Empress's night visit. Covering his naked torso with a silk robe. Standing up, she indignantly protested against the ban on creating a charity department, completely not understanding his action. Demio snorted indifferently, considering it a trifle. The woman continued to be indignant, emphasizing the importance of charity. His gaze fell on her. He thought that the Empress had only come to him to care for the common people in difficult times. The ruler laughed and clapped his hands, admiring her noble heart and truly imperial disposition. Sepia looked at him in anger, understanding his intention to humiliate her. Emphasizing his respect, he declared how the ruler sought to facilitate her oblivion. Her Highness could not understand his words. The man announced that he had transferred the budget allocated for charity to Tita. Shock ran through the woman and she exclaimed, struck by the absurdity of the situation. After all, the plan had been approved. For what reasons should the budget have been transferred to the concubine? With a cheeky smile, he replied that he had taken care of the lady. Since the mistress had so many worries, he decided to entrust the charity budget to her. Rage boiled in the queen's chest and she burst out in a scream. But Demios's commanding voice bound her like an icy wave, a stern reminder that in the face of the threat of empire, the weak must yield. She was struck by the cynical justification of human sacrifice. Her Majesty's mind refused to accept that reality. How could such a heartless creature hold the fate of an entire empire in her hands? Funds that could have been a salvation for many were to be wasted on luxury and the maintenance of his mistress. The idea seemed absurd to Sepia. He indifferently remarked that he would not interfere with her personal charity. Depressed, the Empress was aware of his hostility, but it was also his people, not just hers. And the duty to care for him lay with the entire imperial family. In response, the woman heard a cold accusation of her own contempt for him. Overwhelmed with anger, the Empress made a firm promise that funds for Titi will be allocated separately, insisting on the cancellation of the decree on the transfer of the budget. But she assured me that she would do everything possible to provide the amount that would satisfy the concubine as soon as possible. Suddenly, the lord's hands gripped her waist tightly, pulling her close. His hoarse whisper pierced the air as if that weren't enough. If she wanted to get what she wanted, she should start by doing her duty. Sepia felt a mixture of shock, depression, and deep humiliation. In his red gaze, the Empress saw her own distorted reflection. The man's last words almost touched her lips. They were an unequivocal offer of a deal. The Emperor was waiting for her to visit his bedchamber if she was willing to accept his terms.